on the same page about the data coming out of China is, what do you think the impact is, and isn't the onus on these major media corporations that, again, every article I read, George, every single one of them, down to even Elon Musk tweeting last week, no new cases out of China, and every mainstream media article out there is using these numbers as gospel, right? So,
Right.
yeah, I think maybe that could be a tool that's being used to make the U.S. and Italy and all these other countries look like we're bumbling the issue more than we are, which is something that I wrote about today. But at what point does the media, George, say, we got to get real here, man? We're getting gamed. Do you think that happens eventually?
Honestly, Chris, I'm very cynical of the media. Before I retired, I had a lot of interactions with the media, and I've come to realize that, and there's some great journalists out there. I don't want to throw everyone under the bus, but between the people in the media and politicians, you're really looking at the dregs of society. I mean, it's the bottom of the barrel as far as the integrity, ethics, morality. But I think that the media is going to do whatever they think they need to do to generate the most eyeballs, right? So if you're an MSNBC, whatever the left narrative is, you're going to push that as much as possible because that's what's going to bring in more eyeballs. If you're a Fox and you're more on the right, then you're going to pick up on whatever that narrative is. And if you're an Elon Musk, you're going to look at whatever's best for the price of your stock, and that's going to be the narrative that you're going to try to push. So I think that's where you got to start. You got to start by following the money, and then asking yourself, how is that affecting how they're presenting this, or their decision-making process with what they decide to present and how they decide to present those facts. I mean, listen, the way the media works, especially the news and CNN and a lot of these news shows, just for your viewers who might not know this, they don't report the news. They do not report the news. I know this definitively. They create the news. So what happens at the beginning of the week or every single morning is the employees, the journalists, the writers, everyone, they'll get together and they'll say, okay, what's going to get us the most eyeballs? Okay, well, a story on how China's numbers are going down, that's going to get us the most eyeballs. So then they just collect facts. They cherry pick, and they'll collect facts to build a story around that narrative. Whether that's true or not, that's not the point. That's completely irrelevant. And I want to make sure that I'm clear. It's not just the CNNs that are doing that, or the MSNBCs. It's the Fox. It's every single one of them, based on what target market they're trying to cater to.
Yeah, doesn't it alarm you when you think about that? What I was thinking about this morning, which is the Chinese numbers are essentially the basis, the foundation of the world's information on the coronavirus. They're the basis down, and it's not just the infection numbers, it's them providing other countries with, their scientific data about the virus and the genetic sequencing and all this other shit. When you think, go ahead.
Well, I mean, you're in the thick of things more than I am as far as the American media. I'm completely removed from that, just being down here, and I love that, by the way. That's one of the benefits of being down here. But I look at the Italian data, or what's going on there, or what's going on in Spain, and I was under the impression that the media would focus on Italy and Spain and what's going on with Europe just as much as China. But it sounds like what you're telling me is the mainstream media is just really honing in on China because they say they were able to flatten the curve and just kind of ignoring Spain and Italy as though they're just anomalies. Is that what you're saying?
What's happening right now, and one of the things that inspired me to write this morning, is that the U.S. is being kind of shamed into by the media. The New York Times specifically put out an article, said, hey, we're a lot of missteps here in the U.S., and that's why, our numbers look so terrible comparatively to China. And I don't disagree that there have been missteps in the U.S., but for all of the media to use China as the litmus test to compare themselves against, and also then to watch China and the Global Times, which is, the Chinese state's mouthpiece, go on Twitter and start to kind of push the narrative of, hey, we got this shit under control, but Italy's really fucking it up. The U.S. is really fucking it up. Hey, by the way, we have things so under control here that we're donating supplies to Iran, and we're donating supplies to the Czech Republic. By the way, testing kits that are coming back with 80% of them not working. I think it's all about optics for China. So for them to be able to turn around and change the narrative and say, oh, well, we got it under control. We don't know what the rest of the fucking world is doing. You guys obviously have dropped the ball. They're only allowed to do that. China's only allowed to do that if the rest of the world takes them on their word about the data, and not the other alternative media accounts, social media accounts, other data, supplemental data, cell phone data that suggests that China's numbers could be significantly underreported. That's what enables them to be able to change the narrative like that. And I just find that exceptionally concerning. And I feel like the media is getting duped, and then in turn is turning around and duping the public.
I get what you're saying now, and I totally agree. I think that the U.S. did drop the ball with the testing and whatnot, and I totally think that that's the wrong move for the media to use China as a benchmark,
right?
As though this is pristine data. But the one thing I want to mention on that, Chris, do we expect anything else? I mean, look at even the data in the United States. The media looks at the CPI as though it's gospel, right? They look at the jobs numbers as though it's gospel, and a month later they just revise it. And when they revise it, the market doesn't care. The only thing they care about is just that leading headline the day that it comes out. I mean, look, it boggles my mind, all the statistics that come from the government and from the Federal Reserve that the media just reports as though it's written in stone, and that if you question the validity of the data, then you're just some tinfoil hatter, right? Well, even if it doesn't even make sense, and even if they revise it down the road, and it just goes back to the bull market and people just remembering what they want to remember, like we were saying earlier, and that they get this. We'll go back to the jobs numbers, use that, or even GDP, and they'll say, yep, this was the GDP, or yep, look at this, we've got inflation low, CPI's only at 2%. And then as long as we're in a bull market, the MO is to just take that headline number as long as it's good, and then if it's revised down, then we kind of completely ignore that. It's just that recency bias. But where I really get frustrated, let's say, to say the least, is like with the CPI and the way GDP is measured. This is completely ridiculous. When you look at and I'm talking about real GDP, so you've got to adjust for inflation, but then it all depends on, okay, well, what number are you using for inflation? So if you're using the CPI Okay, well, that takes, let's say that nominal GDP is running at 4% and the CPI is 2%. Okay, you bring it down to 2%, then your real GDP, 2% growth, right? And then everyone takes that as though, yep, that's it. The United States is growing 2%. But they never even ask themselves, okay, well, the number they're using for inflation, A, is it CPI? And if it is the CPI, is it incorrect? Is it understating things? And oh, wait, if it's understating things, then wouldn't that overstate real GDP? And then you start to dig a little bit deeper and you see that they don't use the CPI. They actually use something called the GDP deflator. And then you say, okay, well, I wonder what the GDP deflator is compared to actual CPI. And then you see that it understates inflation even more than the CPI does. And then it's compounded. So if you lay this out on a chart, you see that even if we use CPI, which most people would say is understated, we still only have very, very minimal real GDP growth. And then if CPI is overstated, then we have negative real growth going all the way back to, the last decade when we've supposedly have been in this huge boom in the economy, and we've been in the best economy of all time according to Trump's Twitter feed. So I know that was a rant, but my point is that any of the data that the media uses as gospel, half of it's just complete garbage.